The Philadelphia Inquirer calls Mr. Barrios a, quote, hugely readable, authoritative film historian. Best known for A Song in the Dark, an award-winning examination of the origins and evolution of the movie musical, Mr. Barrios is also the author of Screened Out, a revelatory and decades-spanning look at celluloid portrayals of gays and lesbians. A frequent academic lecturer and commentator for film, television, and DVD documentaries, he's worked also in the music and film industries. In his new book, Dangerous Rhythm, Mr. Barrios makes a critical but impassioned argument for the complex and intimate bonds film musicals have made with audiences for the better part of the last century. The New York Times Book Review calls his observations inspired. Here to inspire you now and tell you more, ladies and gentlemen, won't you please join me in welcoming Richard Barrios.
Thank you, and good evening. Movie musicals, or if you will, musical films. Some people love them, and just as many won't go near them. They're a very native and particular American art form, and sometimes they are totally out of existence. We've gone up and down over the last 90 years through times where they proliferated like crabgrass, and other times when they were nowhere to be found. For those who care about them, whether they're in a feast or famine time, they matter. That's why my book, hold book up, is titled Dangerous Rhythm, and the subtitle is Why Movie Musicals Matter. Now granted, there are lots of them that don't matter. They can be trivial or clueless or worse in all sorts of ways. But the ones that get it right, they're special. They've informed and enriched my life ever since I was about this tall, and I bet they've done the same with at least some of you. Now, how is it exactly that they can do this? In my book and in my presentation tonight, I make the case that the musicals that matter to us, the best ones, are those that understand not only their audiences, but also their history and their predecessors, how the musical past can move forward into the present day. The ones that pretend that they're completely new and hadn't been done before or thought of before, or make no reference to what's come before them, those are the ones that are fooling themselves, because they sure aren't fooling us. Movie musicals and their history can matter in all sorts of ways. And a very unexpected one happened last year at the Tony Awards, of all things. And I say of all things because the Tonys aren't about movies, they're about stage musicals. Millions of people all around the world watching the show were startled and mystified that Hugh Jackman began the show by hopping down the street and into and onto the stage of Radio City Music Hall. Some people said that it was because he was Australian that he did it as a tribute to kangaroos. It's true. But no, it wasn't about kangaroos, and it wasn't even about the stage musicals that this show was being in honor of. It was instead an homage and a tribute to a very little-known 1953 MGM musical film entitled Small Town Girl. The number was directed by one of the masters of musical film, Busby Berkeley, and it starred a very talented, though not all that well-known, song and dance man, Bobby Van. So here then, we'll see a bit of how Hugh Jackman started the I think in the past a lot, the 2014 Oscars, and then back to 1953 for Bobby Van in Small Town Girl. And this number also demonstrates something that movie musicals always need to do, or at least to keep in mind, to make things that are very difficult look easy and possible. In this case, Bobby Van had to stay in bed a week after he shot this number, and later commented that for a full year later, he wasn't really feeling well. Great musicals seldom happen accidentally, so a musical will truly matter when a director and a performer genuinely know what they're doing and also how to work together. Now, one performer who had immense creative input into his films is the man who is often considered to be the central musical film performer, Fred Astaire. His work and his style and his influence will always define a large part of musical film, and there are many ways to praise him and to assess him. He had innate grace. He could make, again, the impossible look easy. He mastered many different forms of dance and of song. But one I especially stress in Dangerous Rhythm is his ability to work with a partner, both partners who worked near his level of technical skill and also those who couldn't. In his very first film, an MGM musical called Dancing Lady, he had to work with someone who didn't dance very well. She did other things well, especially wear clothes, and move very large shoulders, but no, she did not dance well, even though the film was called Dancing Lady, Joan Crawford. In a pair of scenes, we will see first Astaire's dance with Joan Crawford, which also happens to be his very first dance on film. And then after that, we'll see him partnering someone who he did not need to accommodate or to set off, because the way they really communicated best was through dance. And that, of course, is his most famous partner, Ginger Rogers. And that film clip will be from the film that's generally considered the couple's best film, Swing Time. And the number Never Gonna Dance, which we'll see an excerpt of, follows the couple's entire relationship up to this point in the film, which is at this point in an unhappy place. But so we'll get to see Astaire having to kind of make himself look awkward in order to set Joan Crawford off more kindly, and then not having to do it, and dancing beautifully with Ginger Rogers.
Didn't you ever hear of poisonality?
And again, this is a number that can remind us that it takes a lot of work to make something that not only looks this good, but this effortless. When you saw Ginger Rogers do that series of spin pirouettes near the end, around take 38 or 39 of that number, they had to stop briefly to clean off her feet because they had started to bleed. That's what it was about. Earlier, I spoke of how the greatest of musicals understand and know their history. The pair of clips that we're going to see now show history first being made and then being passed along. Both of these films star the same incandescent performer, Maurice Chevalier. The first, Love Me Tonight, was made in 1932 and in many ways was and is truly revolutionary. And here we will see the very beginning of the film, after the credits, and how the director, a genius named Rouben Mamoulian, opens the film. It's a magical collage of sound and image that shows the beginning of a morning in Paris. And then we move forward 26 years to Gigi, which was made when the big studio era was just starting to near its finish. And it too was created by a great director of musicals, Vincent Minnelli. In contrast to the intricate editing of the first clip, you'll see the second clip being done in one long take to show Chevalier's ability to hold the audience with his personality and also with a really good song by Lerner and Loewe. As you'll see, the first clip makes reference to Chevalier's trademark, his straw hat. In the second scene, with an older and still vibrant Chevalier, the straw hat is still there, and when you see near the end of the number when Chevalier uses it, he's encapsulating a large part of musical history and giving us opportunity to celebrate it.
tiny remark that tortures you. The fear that your friends won't like her too. I'm glad I'm not young anymore. The longing to end the stale affair until you find out she doesn't care. I'm glad that I'm not young anymore. No more frustration, no star-crossed lover am I, no aggravation, just one reluctant reply. Lady, goodbye. The fountain of youth is dull as paint. Methuselah is my patron saint. I've never been so comfortable before. Oh, I'm so glad that I'm not young anymore.
Mr. Chevalier reminds us of something that goes without saying. Musicals must lean heavily on their performers. Sometimes those performers can surprise us with unknown previously talents. Here are two examples, one from the very beginning of sound film, 1929, and one from much, much more recently. They are both of very striking and talented women who, up until the time they made these films, were unknown for having musical ability. Again, it's that continuity of history. One era's Gloria Swanson is another era's Catherine Zeta-Jones. Ms. Swanson was a reigning diva of silent film. And when sound film arrived, it was a great surprise that she couldn't only speak well, but that she could really sing. Here in her first talkie, a film called The Trespasser, she did the song live on the set, which was very common practice in those early days, and that is why you will see her right before she starts to sing clear her throat. For Ms. Zeta-Jones, just showing up and looking fabulous might have been enough. But then in Chicago, she proved she could also act and sing and dance well enough to get an Academy Award. And in both cases, who knew?
And then those two bit John
This we did in perfect unison. Now you see me going through it. You may think there's nothing to it, but I simply cannot do
Nearly 65 years after it was made, one film is cited, probably more than any other, as being the greatest of all movie musicals. Now, I would hold that there are perhaps not just one or even two reasons why Singin' in the Rain still holds that prize for so many people. But instead, there is a network of interlocked factors. There's a brilliant cast from Gene Kelly on down. There's a technically expert production, a beguiling assemblage of song and dance, and smart and energetic direction, wonderful singing and dancing, and the professionalism of a studio, MGM, that truly knew more than any other how to make a musical. But I would hold that there are two factors that take a little more precedence even than these, which are obviously very important. One is the script by Broadway's masters of wit, Betty Comden and Adolph Green, which is good enough to make it one of the rare musicals in which the audience doesn't just kind of nod off after the songs. It looks forward to the spoken passages as much as it does to the songs and the dances. And the other is, again, that awareness by truly great musical films of the weight history carries. What, after all, could close the circle more thrillingly than having the greatest of all musical films be about how musical films came to happen in the first place? It's the alpha and the omega, in a way. Now, everybody has his favorite sequence in Singin' in the Rain, wet or dry. But here's one for me that is great because it does show that gentle reverb of history. It depicts the birth of something that became very important in musical film and was, at the time that Singin' in the Rain is set, just starting to find its way a little bit, dubbing and playback recording. And they often define singing on film, or they would later on. They didn't when Gloria Swanson was doing it. And it also shows many of the factors that can make a musical great. The direction and the cast and the music, and an effortless recreation of the period, which was very rare for a 1952 musical to look back at the 1920s and get it right. Now, because musical film can be very self-referential, Singin' in the Rain was produced by the same man who wrote or co-wrote all of its songs, Arthur Freed, who produced more great musicals than anybody else. And then we see Debbie Reynolds dubbing Gene Hagen in this clip, but the truth of the matter was that Debbie Reynolds in this clip was herself dubbed because her voice at that point was not felt to be cultured enough. So there are all these different layers. And here is a glimpse of the wit and the wonder and the delight and the history that are Singin' in the Rain.
Of her charms, would you? They met as you and I, and they were only friends. But before the story ends, he'll kiss her with a sigh. And if the girl were I,
One of the things musicals can give us in a brilliant and unique fashion is spectacle. Other films do it with intergalactic special effects or pyrotechnics or car chases or huge and now often digital crowd scenes. Musicals do it by combining sound and image in audacious and dazzling ways. One way in which they can do it comes in the very first musicals that mattered to what I'm figuring is a number of us, those that did not involve live performance, those that were drawn and painted. That's why Dangerous Rhythm devotes a whole chapter to animated films, from The Birth of Mickey Mouse all the way to Frozen. With animation, as with live action, history plays a major role. And we will see a central production number from Disney's Beauty and the Beast in 1991, which pays a very conscious and joyful homage to many musical films that came before it, including the work of two people whose work we've already seen this evening, Maurice Chevalier and Busby Berkeley. It's sung by Angela Lansbury and Jerry Orbach, and it's called Be Our Guest. That excerpt is followed by another number from years earlier that in some ways defines musical spectacle. It comes from a moment in time, 1936, when the studio know-how could make a musical matter just by sheer blockbuster magnificence. The film is The Great Ziegfeld, and though it won an Academy Award for Best Picture, the truth of the matter is that some of it is pretty humdrum in a great big way. But the very first half finale of it truly delivers the goods and still does. And we'll see a number of factors again that sort of define musical film, including dubbing, because the singer we see on screen is Dennis Morgan, but the voice we hear belongs to Alan Jones. And notice once again how it's done in one long single take with no tricks or special effects. The spectacle it shows is too big, obviously, for the Broadway theater that is supposed to be its setting, but it still evokes the magic connoted by the name Ziegfeld, and also the magic connoted by the concept of movie musicals. Here from 1936 is The Great Ziegfeld, preceded by, from 1991, Beauty and the Beast.
She's our guest.
Several people thumbed over here, line up, not
Course by course, one by one, till you shout. Then we'll sing you off to sleep as you digest. Tonight you'll prop your feet up, but for now let's eat up. Be our guest, be our guest, be our guest. Please be our guest.
A pretty girl is like a melody that haunts you night and day.
You're not going to see the likes of that again. They couldn't afford it. And that's one of the things I write about in the book, is how the economics have changed so much. Musicals became so expensive. That was one of the things that sort of doomed them for a long time to extinction. It's a little bit better now, and musicals like Into the Woods still get made, but it doesn't happen the way it used to, and it never will. A presentation about musical film could continue at length, which means, yes, I could go on. And it goes in many different directions, because we are looking at 9 decades of work and a whole fleet, battalion, army of great performers, including one who I didn't get to show here today, who's celebrating her 91st birthday, Doris Day. But, and there's the span of art that goes all the way from 1929 with the Broadway Melody and the Desert Song to 2015 with Into the Woods and Pitch Perfect 2, which was the surprise top-grossing film last weekend. There are triumphs, and as I have a lot of fun writing in the book, there are the disasters. For much of that, I invite you to read Dangerous Rhythm. If you like it, please feel free to post your comments on Amazon. You can follow me on Facebook, and you can read my other books on film, A Song in the Dark and Screened Out. For now, before we go to a Q&A, I'd like to leave you with one final musical moment. Now, as song is as necessary to film as dance, and sometimes more so. And of course, film has brought us an uncountable number of fine songs and great singers. Unfortunately, sometimes even the finest songs and singers have ended up on the cutting room floor. A case in point features a performer who stands alongside Fred Astaire and maybe a few others at the apex of the musical film, Judy Garland. She introduced and sang many songs in her films, but others sometimes did not make it to the final cut. In the 1949 film In the Good Old Summertime, she performed a song by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg, who had written the songs for the musical film that had made her a star, and I might add is the musical film that matters to me the most, The Wizard of Oz. This song had already been cut out of an earlier film called Metropolitan, and Garland's version hit the floor as well, apparently because it was considered too jarringly sad and poignant for what was already just sort of an ordinary, nice, light, romantic musical comedy. Nevertheless, it remained the favorite song of both Garland and composer Harold Arlen, and history in this case was kind. The cut footage survived when it often does not, and it shows what can happen when a great performer embraces a wonderful song and when a musical film truly matters. Judy Garland in the Good Old Summertime, 1949.
Last night, when we were young, love was a star, a song unsung. Life was so new, so real, so right. Ages ago, last night. Today the world is old. You went away and time grew cold. Where is that star that seemed so bright ages ago? Last night, to think that spring had depended on merely this, a look, a kiss,
I can't think of a better note to end on. And now I love getting questions, and I love trying to answer them. So if we can, let's open it up for a Q&A, and please wait until you have a mic pointed at you to ask a question. Questions, please. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. First of all, do you have a personal favorite? You mentioned The Wizard of Oz. Is that a personal favorite or just...
That's my favorite film.
Okay. What about a second?
I have 3 favorites, and The Wizard of Oz was the only one that I didn't have a clip from here tonight. My 3 favorites, for a lot of maybe aesthetic reasons, but also personal reasons, would be The Wizard of Oz first, and Love Me Tonight, which you saw Paris waking up, and Singing in the Rain. Very mainstream.
Also, you said that musicals can't be made the way they used to be. Why is that?
A lot of it's the economics. When there were the big studios, the studios had their own dance departments and music departments, and now for every single musical film made, everything has to be started from scratch. And where a company will spend $200 million on the, 705th Mission Impossible sequel, they don't want to spend $75 million on a musical film. That was why, for example, Chicago was shot in Toronto, where it was a lot cheaper to do it, and still they had to pinch every penny. So a lot of it's the economics, and a lot of it is what you might call maybe a loss of innocence, a change of culture. People used to like to go see production numbers, and what's sort of taken the place of production numbers are car crashes, in a way. There different kinds of escapism change, but the success of Into the Woods and Pitch Perfect shows that there's still an audience. It's just it's a lot more difficult to tailor the film to the audience because so many things have changed. But the good part of it is that now there are more musical films from 1928 onward available for us to see than there have ever been before, whether the internet or Netflix or DVD. There's our Turner Classic Movies. There's more now than there have been ever before. Yes?
Many folks feel that a book is always better than the movie. How do you think about theater versus film, or the reverse, film into theater?
I promise you I write a lot about that in the book. There are some films that have actually improved in some ways on their sources, and there are many more films that totally ruined really good material. A couple of months ago, I spoke in New York before the Encores at City Center presentation of the stage musical Paint Your Wagon. To prepare for that, I had to watch the movie of Paint Your Wagon. I didn't have gray hair before I watched that movie. There aren't any hard and fast ways to judge it. Some have been really atrocious, and then there have been things like Cabaret that have gotten it really well, or The King and I, which had really, really good casting. And Chicago, which, some people didn't think it honored its source well enough. I think it did. There's no one way to film a musical. Some try to be too slavish to the source material and end up being stiff and stagey. I think of the film version of My Fair Lady that way. Some change their material way, way too much. Paint Your Wagon is an example of that. And then there's one like The Sound of Music, which takes the source material that was good but not great to begin with and uses pretty much the best parts of it and finds a way to put it onto film and really make it look like a film and not just a can. So there's all these different ways to do it, and some people have done it really well, and some people should have been put in jail. Yes.
One of my favorite songs is Thanks for the Memories, and I see it up there, and I think it is Bob Hope's finest moment, singing that song with the original, the 1938 version. Would you comment on that?
Well, the reason you see it up here is that we decided, in case we needed to fill some time, we would bring a couple of extra things to pad out the program. But that is, and I write extensively about that song in the book. That was Bob Hope's feature film debut. He had been in some comedy short subjects, but this was basically the first time most audiences saw Bob Hope. And it's really a silly movie. And that's one of the strange things about musicals, is that a film can be really dumb and, not mean very much, and then in the middle of it there will be this absolutely transcendent moment. And this is a case of that. It's a dumb, big, expensive movie called The Big Broadcast of 1938. And it stars W.C. Fields and Martha Ray and Dorothy Lamour and a bunch of other people. And there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that and some dumb comedy. And then in the middle of it, here comes this amazing, beautiful song that was written for the film called Thanks for the Memory. And it was, even though at that time everybody was singing with pre-recording, would record their songs before the film was shot, the director insisted that Bob Hope and his partner, you see in the little frame there, Shirley Ross, do it live on the set, and they play a married couple who have divorced, and they go through the song sort of recapping their life together. And at the end of it, Shirley Ross actually broke down and cried on the set. And you're kind of tempted to do that too. But it shows, once again, this silly movie, but then in the middle of it, there's this moment that is really great art. And I agree with you. It was the beginning of a long film career and a life that lasted over 100 years. And I think this was the best that Bob Hope ever was. And it became his theme song, as you know.
Thank you. Richard, one of the works that's considered a landmark moving from stage to screen in several versions is Showboat. And I'm surprised you didn't mention that as one of your favorites. Could you comment on that?
Well, I only said three.
I understand. Could you comment on that? And it's because everyone thinks of that as one of the greatest musical stage and movies as well.
Well, it was one time on film. I have a chapter in the book on the greatest musical films, and Showboat is among them. Which one? Well, there's only one. Showboat was a hugely revolutionary stage musical in 1927. Before it was unknown for a Broadway musical to have a sort of a large, through-the-years plot with drama and melodrama and people and love and situation that you really cared about, not just about jokes and chorus girls and all this kind of stuff. So it really was revolutionary on the stage, and it had a magnificent score by Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein, including Old Man River, Can't Help Loving That Man, and many, many more. Now, it was filmed 3 times. The first time was originally just supposed to be a silent film, and sound kind of came in while they were filming it. So they added sound to it kind of after the fact. And it did well enough, but it's mainly still a silent movie with sound sequences. And then several people who were in the Broadway show did a prologue, kind of a short subject before the feature. So it's not really a version of the musical so much as it is just kind of a little bit of this and that. And then in 1936, that same studio, Universal, did it again, this time with a couple of the Broadway's original cast members, including the great Paul Robeson and Helen Morgan. And it was directed by a man who was best known for his work in horror films, James Whale. He had directed Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. And it was tremendous. It's a beautiful film and just good in almost every way. It gets a little uneven near the end, but it's a stunning film. And then 15 years after that, it was remade at MGM, and that's probably the version most people have seen, with Ava Gardner as Julie and Katherine Grayson and Howard Keel and Marge and Gower Champion. And that version's very pretty, and the songs are well done, but it's MGM, it's very glossy and slick looking, and it doesn't move you the way that the 1936 version. So we have 3 different ways to approach a stage musical, and they are all in their ways, except for the first one, true to the spirit of the material, but it's the 1936 version that wins the prize. If you ever get a chance to see it, it turns up on Turner Classic Movies fairly frequently. It's out on DVD. The 1936 Showboat with Irene Dunne. See it. Anyone else? All the way in the back.
Right behind me. Thank you. I have a question. There was a book that came out about 1968 being a changing year for films, and there was one musical, I think, with Rex Harrison that just bombed. But I never hear Grease mentioned. Why is Grease kind of not respected in the musical pantheon?
It's not that it's not respected, I think. It's because it kind of holds itself up to be a different kind of musical. It's sort of like a delightful cartoon. It's almost like an animated film with real people. And I don't mean that at all insultingly. It was a big hit on Broadway, but it wasn't a hit show, and people didn't go to it the way they went to see My Fair Lady or Man of La Mancha or something like that. But the thing was, Grease, I think its main significance is sort of historical, even fiscal, because Grease came out in 1978 in a time when there were almost no musical films being made, and Grease became the highest grossing film of that year and also of the highest grossing musical of all time. And I think it's still neck and neck with The Sound of Music, adjusted for inflation, as the most successful musical ever made. And of course, John Travolta had a tremendous hit with it, and it was like a big 1-2 punch of musicals for their time: Saturday Night Fever and then Grease. He should have been in Chicago. That was his call. He turned it down. Bad move. And the Rex Harrison film you mentioned from 1967 was Dr. Dolittle, which was one of the kiss of death movies for musicals. Because of the success of The Sound of Music, the studios decided to jump on the bandwagon. They didn't do it a lot of times with the care and savvy of The Sound of Music. So there were a lot of big dinosaurs, and maybe that and Paint Your Wagon, I think, were the worst ones of all, and it lost a lot of money.
Hi, this was just great, wonderful.
Thank you.
Bring my mother, like, sitting with me if she could be here, because I grew up with this. What do you think was one of the first musicals that really integrated the story and the song, instead of it just being like a show, but something that was just really made it flow, and it was a story, and you could accept the whole premise and it not be,
Because, and you're right, because a lot of the first musicals were backstage musicals, which would be about, song and dance, people having crises in their lives, and then you'd go on stage for what was basically an unrelated, tap dance. I showed a clip of one of the first here, Love Me Tonight, the film with Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald and Myrna Loy and some other wonderful people, because it's a fairy tale, basically. It's a love story fairy tale, and it's all done where the music and the script and the plot sort of always are surrounding each other, and they move the songs move the story along, and the plot doesn't really just stop. People move very easily from speaking into singing and that sort of thing. Movies occasionally do it well, but there's still that kind of thing of backstage musicals. Even today, Pitch Perfect 2, once again. That's, they use the songs as an excuse for, the music without really connecting them. And I think a number of the best musical films are the ones that can make those bridges between the speaking and the singing. And I think The Sound of Music did it very well, too. We have time for one more question. Okay, in the front.
How you
Talk to me later.
Okay. Yeah, I was just surprised that you didn't mention the jazz singer, the singing fool, Al Jolson, and so on and so forth. That's where it began, I think.
I mentioned them a lot in the book. They are musical films, but those two in particular, I find them, in a way, they're responsible for the birth of musical film, but they still, of course, have one foot in the era of silent film. The jazz singer has more silent passages than talking passages. The Singing Fool which is a film people basically now don't know at all, was the biggest hit of its time. And some people have said it was the biggest hit made before Gone with the Wind, which isn't quite true, but it was that big. And I'll just tell you, in the book, I address that a lot. I think there are reasons why Al Jolson has sort of fallen out of favor. And some of them have to do with political incorrectness, because a lot of, as most of you know, I'm sure, a lot of his image was founded on him wearing blackface, which, will look really, really bad to people now. Even though 90 years ago it was, considered a part of mainstream entertainment. I'll just tell you this. I was lucky in that regard. My father was a big fan of Al Jolson. In fact, I've dedicated the book to him. His favorite movie was The Jolson Story. So I got to hear Al Jolson's recordings from a very young age, and then came to his movies fairly early. So I got to understand. It's funny, though. People even in my generation will tell me, I don't get Jolson. But I do get him, and I think the strength of his personality and of his singing were crucial in bringing sound to film and beginning what eventually turned into the movie musical film. And I don't think his importance should ever be underestimated, nor his ego. That's it. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.